Hello gamers, Power Heal here, and today we're going to be talking about raid quality in WoW Classic Anniversary. So I figured this would be a good topic because it's kind of exploding right now. There's a lot of people talking about this with, concern about the Burning Crusade, because people are wondering, is this terrible raid quality that we've been experiencing in WoW Classic Anniversary, is this going to continue into the Burning Crusade Anniversary? And I think that the main point that people tend to be driving at there is that they associate the bad quality we have now with the lack of GDKP in the game. And they're wondering if in the Burning Crusade, we're also going to not have GDKP. And if that's the case, then they think that we're completely doomed, because obviously the raids get harder. And if we have this same terrible raid quality, then pugging is basically going to be not an option in the Burning Crusade. And I'm going to push back against these thoughts a little bit in this video, particularly the one that GDKP is the root end-all cause of why raid quality has gone down. But also, I think it's a little bit different than people expect. So ultimately, I would be willing to admit that I think GDKP plays a part in the raid quality declining, but it's not for the reason that people think. We'll kind of get into that as well. So first we'll kind of recap the argument, right, of why people think that the Burning Crusade, not the Burning Crusade, but why GDKP is so good for the health of pug raids, right? And it basically just kind of goes back to incentives, because people view GDKP as providing a great incentive for people to play well in a raid, is the idea. The idea that your gold is essentially being held hostage till the end of the run. If you play poorly, you can lose your cut. In a lot of cases, it's almost like at will. So there's obviously specific rules that you'd have to follow. And, if you don't follow those rules, you don't get a cut. But also just general poor play can sometimes result in a cut deduction or just no cut at all. And people think that this is like the panacea for raid quality. And this is why raid quality was so great in 2019 and everything like that, because GDKP was around and it just really incentivized everybody to play better. And it makes sense on the surface, right? Because incentives do matter to some degree. But I think for the most part, what's really going on there is that there's just not really a desire to play with people who aren't good at the game, right? And even if you're the type of person that you like kind of mentoring and teaching people, you could at least admit that for the majority of players who really maybe don't have those sort of same aspirations as you do, they would rather just play with people who know kind of what's going on, right? And what goes on in these GDKP runs typically is that the runs almost function like a retail sort of carry buyer run, where you have a bunch of people in the run that are shown to be competent, right? And they are going to be the bulk of what is carrying your raid. Now, it's not that they can't bid on gear. There's no strict roles here, right? So a carry can still bid on a gear. Maybe a carry is coming to the run. They have most of the pieces they need, but they're just bidding on a big piece. Maybe they have the big piece. They're just bidding on some smaller pieces. Maybe they have the PvE pieces they want. They're just bidding on PvP pieces. Or maybe they're just coming to soak the gold pot at the end. So there's numerous reasons why you can come as a carry, but these people are already going to be good, right? And then you have people who are buying. Now, the buyers, again, there's a kind of flexibility here, right? You can be a buyer that's completely bad and you're not expecting to get a cut at all. In some cases, I've seen just the fact that somebody's gear is so bad, like maybe going into a Nax run, the agreement is that even though they're not a bad player, they're going to contribute almost basically nothing, especially if they're like a damage dealer or something. So the idea becomes, well, you're not going to get a cut, but you can come to the run to buy stuff. Like this is not uncommon at all, right? So in reality, I guess what I'm kind of driving at here is that when you're forming these GDKPs, it tends to do more with the fact that you are creating a raid and sculpting it that is meant to be good from the start. It's not really the incentives themselves that are kind of, going into things, because as a carry, you want to set up a run where, you have big buyers that are going to give you a big pot. And as somebody who's, trying to buy a lot of items, trying to spend a lot of money, trying to whale, you want a run that's consistent. You want to make sure you get to the items you want. You don't want to join a Nax GDKP and get locked and then not even kill Saffron, not even kill KT. Okay, so there's mutual benefits in here for each party to kind of seek each other out and take the time to build this powerful roster, especially because this is going to be something that continues week to week to week, right? And this is going to be a great source of gear for the people that want to buy gear. It's going to be a great source of gold for the people that want to, continue to line their WoW bank account. So you're basically incentivized to build this properly from the start, and you're incentivized to really do thorough gear checks. You're incentivized to check people's experience, maybe even talk with them on Discord before getting them into the run. A lot of these runs can be sort of very insular at the high level. Like a lot of the GDKPs that run like a well-oiled machine, they tend to be somewhat insular, and it can be difficult to get into them at times, right? Because everybody in there has a spot, right, that is like they're serving a particular function, whether they be to carry the raid or to spend gold. And when people compare this type of run to like some run-of-the-mill pug that opens up in trade chat, it's a very unfair comparison, and they forget that you can have like bad GDKPs easily. There was tons of bad GDKPs back in the day as well, that like I've been in ZG GDKPs before in 2019 that didn't finish, didn't kill Hakar, and just because you have this incentive structure, it doesn't matter at all if you don't do the groundwork of vetting everybody and kind of doing the things that you need to do for any raid to be successful, right? So it doesn't matter if it's a soft res run or a GDKP run. You can build a high quality run in either system. That's going to be my sort of primary argument. And I've seen this even on this version of Anniversary. On my Paladin, there's a exceptionally clean run. 1 second. Sorry about that. But yeah, on my Paladin, there's an exceptionally clean run that happens. And I was even thinking of maybe doing Nax with them because I know that run is going to be fantastic just because of like how tightly that guy runs the ship, right? And it's really just about standards in terms of recruitment, standards in terms of looking at logs, standards in terms of gear, and you can do it in a soft res run if you want. The thing is, there's just less of those people that really care about putting on runs like that, because a lot of times when people are going to be hosting runs, they want something in return, is sort of the idea, right? So with the soft res run, a lot of times that'll show up in the form of soft or hard reserves, but realistically, a lot of people just prefer gold, right? It's more flexible, especially in a system where you can use the gold and then turn that into gear. And keep in mind that in these runs, these GDKP runs that people are running, a lot of times they're getting a disproportionate amount of gold for running the run, right? Because they're getting a 2 times bonus or potentially even a 3 times bonus as being the leader, something of that sort. So in reality, there's just less motivation to put together runs. It's not really the fact that, people are going to get kicked out and not get their cut, right? It's that there's really, people don't have an incentive to start these runs to begin with, because their idea is like if they're going to start a run, like they want to reap an insane amount of benefit. And honestly, like I think it's terrible. I think it's, if you're going into and setting up runs just for the point of getting a benefit from it, I mean, it's just not really great for the game, in my opinion. People are going to try and justify it. They're going to be like, well, I'm putting in extra time, I'm putting in extra effort. People have put in extra time and extra effort, in this game for years, and we didn't have any of this hard reserve culture, or I'm going to give myself 3 times the cut for running the GDKP culture at the start, right? And it really doesn't need to continue now. There's some items, right, it makes sense to have maybe in a soft reserve or hard reserve run, right? And I think those kind of get a little bit of leeway for especially tank items, for example, right? I actually think if you had GDKP in this go around of Classic, you might even see some specific tank items that would not be up for bid, and usually that's kind of like a big taboo in the community. But I think exceptions would have been made this time around, just because people have gotten insanely greedy with every iteration of the game that comes out, right? So, yeah, I think first of all, it's just really not it's really more just about that the people that are highly motivated to organize good runs are people that want to do that to extract value from the game specifically. And if you're going to proposition them with a scenario where they can extract less value, then they are not going to do as many runs, right? So it's not really that like all the runs are bad. It's just that you're not seeing quite as many runs that are ran well, because those people, just want a huge source of, they want a huge boon for running the run. Now, the other reason, and I think this plays a huge factor, especially in more of kind of like your just average pug runs, is I think that the quality of player on WoW Classic has just degraded over time. So we're sort of in like, officially it's the second, but it's kind of like the third iteration of this already. You could count it, you could even say it's the fourth if you wanted to count Season of Discovery, but I wouldn't really count that. But if you count 2019 Classic, you count a Season of Mastery, and then you count Anniversary, this is the third time we've been kind of going through this Song and Dance. And that's if you're not even counting like private servers or anything of that nature, right? Tons of people have played on private servers, so many people have gone through this game so many times, and many of the more experienced players have just kind of bowed out over time, or they're just waiting for something new like Classic Plus. They don't want to replay vanilla over and over again. So naturally, with more experienced players dipping out of the scene, players with all that knowledge, you're going to be left with less experienced players overall. It's a higher chance that people you're going to be playing with are newer. Maybe they haven't done these raids before, right? So they really have no idea what they're doing, and things of that nature. And I also think in 2019 in particular, there's a particular obsession with box checking in WoW Classic, and I think that WoW Classic actually gained a bunch of the retail population base. So when they announced WoW Classic in 2019, the thought was kind of like, well, this is for all the P server people, right? It's like we're throwing them a bone. But it kind of became almost a phenomena. And people who are retail players, they just hopped on for the fun of it. Players like Sea-Doo, things like that. Like, these are big names from retail that hopped on to play Classic WoW, Peekaboo, things of that nature. And, they were just having fun with it. It was kind of like their fun game. And when you kind of move on from release to release, you kind of lose more and more of those highly experienced, good players from retail in every kind of run through. A lot of players, like there's some players, like I would consider myself one of these players. I was a retail player, and then, had played Classic to play with friends and things of that nature to try it out. And I actually had a lot of fun. And that's kind of how I got into making Classic content and things of that nature. But not every retail player that plays does find this version of the game fun. A lot of them, it's kind of like a novel experience. They maybe want to go all the way through, get to Nax, check the box, and then just move on to the next retail expansion or whatever, right? So a lot of those players who were quite experienced with the game overall, even if they weren't experienced with Classic, a lot of that does translate. Like, just being generally good at the game translates really well into Classic, because there's not a lot of super mechanical things about Classic, and in some ways maybe it doesn't translate all that well because it is sort of knowledge based, but a lot of the knowledge can be kind of given to you on the fly. Like, somebody can kind of just tell you, like, if you're, just move out of this mechanic, or, if you have the bomb, make sure you get out of the raid. Just really simple instructions like that, and that goes a long way. You don't have to be like a connoisseur of Classic to perform well in this game. So if you're good at other versions of the game and you come to Classic and you have a little bit of guidance, you're going to be able to do just fine. And there's also like a ton of content that was put out, especially in 2019 for Classic. So, realistically, all those retail players, I think, were a huge part of making the game feel so easy and seamless, right? And now we're kind of losing all those players, and we have a lot of like the super, super casual people that just love WoW Classic that are playing the game. And those people were more dispersed before, right? You had a bunch of the kind of sort of try-hard min-max from retail coming in, mixed with the very casual Classic player. And then now that ratio has kind of gone down. So there's a lot more just Classic casual players in, and a lot less like try-hard min-max retail players. And those players that are left, since there's fewer of them, they've obviously kind of, collected themselves in specific guilds and things of that nature, and that takes even more juice out of the pug scene, right? So I think that is honestly a huge issue, is just that, like, the lack of experienced players leaving, and then even players that maybe weren't experienced but were good at the game with retail, they are no longer sticking around for tons of Classic cycles. Now, I imagine those players will probably be back in Classic Plus, and maybe they'll be back in the Burning Crusade, because the Burning Crusade for those types of retail players, in my opinion, seems to be received better than WoW Classic, right? So those people may actually just, especially if they offer like a boost or something like that, they may just hop on, boost a character, and jump into the Burning Crusade Anniversary, right? So will the raid quality be quite as bad in the Burning Crusade Anniversary? It kind of depends, because I think that, you know, we're going to get more good players kind of coming back to playing the game, so that's kind of a boon for pugs being better, but then obviously the content is just harder in general, right? So I think it probably won't be as good as 2019 in terms of overall quality, but I really think that even if you allow GDKP to come back, you know, you are going to gain a little bit more quality, right? Because like I said in the earlier portion of the video, and, you know, I did admit, these players that are kind of driving the GDKP runs, they're very incentivized to make the runs strong and find the strongest players possible, right? And also, GDKP runs also use other players' alts as well. So if somebody has like a main in a normal guild, and then they're trying to gear out an alt, but that player is like a good player or top player, they're more apt to want to do that through GDKP. And GDKP may incentivize them to even make alts, right? Because they feel like it's an easy way for them to acquire gear in that character. So I do think if you were to open up GDKP for the Burning Crusade, it would improve the raid quality a little bit. But realistically, a lot of this stuff is ultimately just sort of playing out for a lot of people. You know, it just feels old played. They want the new, fresh thing. And a lot of the players that are just really good at the game are probably not coming back until there's a Classic Plus or something like that. Like, obviously, I think the exception to this is sort of maybe PvP players, because there's a big obsession around the Burning Crusade Arena in particular, but the Burning Crusade PvP I feel like is not rated quite as highly as something like Burning Crusade Arena. Burning Crusade Arena is like the PvP players just like, they love this, right? They can't get enough. So yeah, I think it'll help a little bit if they remove GDKP, but I'm kind of curious, because I don't really think that they're going to do that. Maybe we can make a video talking about that next, whether or not they're going to remove GDKP. I'm not really sure, because I feel like to remove it is almost like, it's like they feel like they're taking a step backwards, you know? They came out like really strong and strident about protecting the player experience, and I think for the most part, their reasons for why they removed GDKP don't really line up with like this whole thing about the raid quality being poor. Like, they don't really care about the raid quality, right? They just... I think the reason why they removed GDKP at base for them, like at the bedrock reason, is that they don't want a player to kind of go into a run and then be priced out gold-wise, and they feel like gold is a very unintuitive way to dole out items. So they prefer things like soft res or their own even like need for greed system in the party, right? So if they have like a very new player, doesn't have much gold, they don't want them to go into a run and, you know, maybe accidentally find themselves into a GDKP, and all of a sudden it's like now that lockout is wasted and people are like, oh, you want that item? Sorry, you have to pay 500 gold for it or something like that. I think that's the big thing, and they did kind of mention that in their post. They talked a lot about community cohesion, and they felt that GDKP disrupted that a bit. So I personally don't think that they're going to actually go back on this, so it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future, but yeah, I think that's the main reason behind the fall of raid quality. Just a lot of good players kind of leaving the game or not wanting to do PvE content anymore, and just waiting for that new thing. And obviously GDKP, like I said, it does influence that a little bit, because some of these people, you know, they do have uber incentives to create these uber raids when, you know, they are... when GDKP is in the game. But the last point that I will say to that, which I kind of missed talking about when I mentioned it earlier, is that although I do think that is a case, right, I think that the people that view this as like affecting the whole game are a bit naive. in other words, when you're in these groups, and I've been in these groups, right, before with Rock Apes and Psalm and things of that nature, where you have the premier GDKP or one of the premier GDKPs, the runs are always smooth, they're going perfect, you're getting paid lots of gold. You have this tendency to think like this is how it is for most people on the server. They're just joining these GDKPs, they're getting paid out, everything's going the same way, but in reality, it's kind of only affecting that group of players in the know, right? So it's not like the average player is necessarily benefiting from these super juiced GDKP runs. In fact, a lot of the times what's going to happen is if GDKP returns and the people who organize these really high echelon runs return, the people who want to participate in those runs are also going to return. So there's a contingent of players right now that aren't playing the game because GDKP is not in the game. They want to be able to go to those high tier runs, right? So if they allow GDKP to come back, what's going to happen is the people who lead those runs are going to come back, and then all the people who participate in them are going to come back. So the average player here, they have no easier time getting into this run, right? It's not like the people who organize are coming back and then they're just inviting any average player, any Joe Schmo with any amount of gold or any amount of experience off the street in Shattrath, right? That's not what's going to be happening for the Burning Crusade, even if they do allow GDKP to come back. It's kind of going to be the same insular communities for the most part. That a lot of the players know each other. It's a lot of players alts in the raid, right? And you're just kind of basically doing, like I said, the retail carry runs, where you're either carrying or buying or doing a little bit of a mix of both. So that's my thoughts on raid quality. And I just think until we actually get Classic Plus or something really truly fresh that a lot of the good players want to come back and sink their teeth into, we're just going to have to deal with it. It is what it is. Players have gotten worse, and that's the bottom line. So thank you guys for watching. Curious to hear what you guys think on this topic, and I will talk to you guys next time.